4 #1 picks this decade have been quarterbacks, and all 4 of their head coaches have been fired before those rookie seasons even ended. That's not just a run of bad luck, it's a clear pattern that tells us something is broken. Every time one of these young players struggles in year 1, the conversation immediately pivots to whether or not he's a bust. The label of being a top pick sounds like a golden ticket, but the reality is that it usually puts a massive target on your back before you've even taken a single professional snap. We need to be honest about how the draft actually works, because teams don't end up with the first pick by doing everything the right way. They pick first because they've been losing games at an alarming rate. Whether it's a bad roster, messy front office, or poor coaching, it's usually a toxic mix of all 3. The draft is sold as a giant reset where a franchise quarterback is supposed to be the hero who fixes every problem. That's the pitch that gets ownership excited and gives fans a reason to buy season tickets. But the logic behind it's completely flawed. You're taking a 22-year-old kid and dropping him into a broken organization while expecting him to carry 52 other players who weren't even good enough to stay out of the basement last year. It's totally backwards, and it feels a lot like handing someone a single mop and asking them to clean up a flood while the water's still pouring in through the front door. If you're looking at these organizations before the pick, the numbers tell a pretty dark story. Cleveland had managed to go 1-31 over 2 seasons before Baker Mayfield arrived, and the Jags suffered through multiple double-digit loss seasons in a row before they landed Trevor Lawrence. The Rams were coming off a Jeff Fisher era where they went 31-45 over 4 years, while the Panthers handed Bryce Young one of the weakest rosters in the league. We can't forget about Caleb Williams getting handed Matt Eberflus or Cam Ward's best offensive teammate this year being Tony Pollard. These weren't situations where teams just needed a little spark to get over the hump. These were entire organizations that were fundamentally broken from the top down. The thing is, these teams know exactly how bad the situation is, but they draft the quarterback anyway and make him the face of the franchise. They put him on every poster and sell his jersey to everyone in town, only to turn around and blame him when the rebuild doesn't happen overnight. Most people that age are just trying to figure out how to rent an apartment or get a job or do anything because the economy sucks. Yet these guys are handed a broken billion-dollar franchise and told to have it fixed by the end of week 1. Now we gotta talk about what actually happens when these guys walk through the door on day 1, because this is where the real damage actually starts. Take Jared Goff back in 2016 for example. The Rams traded a massive haul to move up and grab him first overall, but the head coach Jeff Fisher reportedly didn't even want him in the building. He had his eyes on someone else, so you ended up with a 21-year-old rookie starting his career for a coach who had zero confidence in him from the jump. Jared couldn't even beat out Case Keenum for the starting job when the season kicked off, and things only got worse from there. When he finally got his shot on the field, he averaged a measly 155 yards a game over 7 starts, which stands as one of the worst rookie performances we've ever seen from a top pick. He threw more interceptions than touchdowns, and Fisher was fired after a 4-9 start, leaving Goff to finish the year looking completely lost while the media declared his career dead before age 22. Everything changed when Sean McVay arrived and installed a legitimate system that actually played to Goff's strengths. Within just 2 years of that coaching swap, Goff was lighting up the league for 8,400 yards and 60 touchdowns, even being the captain of the team that went to the Super Bowl. It was the exact same player, but the environment around him finally was functional. We saw a similar disaster with Trevor Lawrence in 2021. The Jags hired Urban Meyer to lead the way, but the entire situation started falling apart almost immediately. Between the viral bar videos, reports of Meyer kicking his own players, and the coach publicly blaming his assistants after every loss, the building was on fire. The Jags sat at a miserable 2-11 before Urban was finally fired after 13 games into the season, meaning Trevor never got a real offensive system to learn or a staff he could actually trust. His completion percentage dipped to 59% while he threw 12 touchdowns against 17 interceptions, leading many to wonder if the best prospect in a decade was an actual NFL bust. The truth is, he wasn't playing poorly just because of the lack of talent. He was really just trying to survive the chaos. It took until year 5 for Lawrence to look like the player everyone expected on draft night. Once he got a new coach in Liam Cohen and a fresh mindset, he finally took off and finished the 2025 season as an MVP finalist. It shouldn't take 5 years to get a real chance, but that's the reality of a bad landing spot. Then you have Bryce Young in 2023, who came in as a Heisman winner with an electric playmaking style despite being only 5'10". His coach Frank Reich was fired after a 1-10 start, and by year 2, Young was already benched and labeled a failure. But if you pull the curtain back and look at the roster, the Panthers had one of the worst receiving groups in the league, and an offensive line that let Young get hit on almost every dropback. By year 3, the situation finally stabilized, and Bryce responded by leading Carolina to an 8-9 record and a playoff berth with 23 touchdowns and 6 game-winning drives. The Panthers ended up picking up his 5th-year option, proving he was the same talented player who just needed a stable team around him. Caleb Williams dealt with the same noise in 2024. He was the most hyped prospect in years, but after Matt Eberflus was fired 12 games into the season, the Bears finished 5-12 and the bust narrative started spinning. However, Chicago made a smart move by hiring Ben Johnson, who's widely considered one of the best offensive minds in the game today. In year 2, Caleb looked like a completely different person, leading the Bears to a division title and a massive playoff win over Green Bay. He made the incredible 4th down scramble throw in the wildcard round to Rome Odunze, then had an even more insane throw the following week to take the Rams into OT. Finally, look at Cam Ward in 2025. Brian Callahan was fired just 6 games into Ward's rookie year, and the team stumbled to a 3-14 finish. That makes 4 straight first overall quarterbacks who lost their head coach during their very first season in the NFL. The quarterback is just the one who ends up paying the price for the instability. The thing is, a young QB needs a massive amount of reps in the same system with the same terminology to build chemistry with his teammates. Every time a team fires a coach, they reset the clock back to 0. You aren't just swapping out a leader, you're throwing away the entire offensive vocab the kid spent his first year learning. Coaching turnover is a great way to ruin a career, but there's another path that's just as dangerous. Even if you have a stable coaching staff and a solid playbook, a front office can still bury a young star by failing to build a real team around him. Andrew Luck is probably the most painful example of this over the past 20 years. He came out of Stanford in 2012 as a can't-miss prospect, and from the moment he put on a Colts jersey, he lived up to every bit of the hype. He threw for 4,300 yards as a rookie and made the Pro Bowl right away, dragging a roster that wasn't ready for primetime into the postseason. Luck did that 4 times in his first 4 years, using his sheer will and talent to overcome massive holes in the depth chart. The problem was that the Colts front office kept putting money in the wrong positions. While Luck was getting hit and sacked every single week, the organization was busy investing in players who didn't actually help them win games. The offensive line was consistently ranked near the bottom of the league, and by the time Luck's career ended, he had been sacked 174 times in only 86 games. That averages out to 2 sacks every single time he stepped foot on the field for his entire career. The physical toll was brutal, resulting in a lacerated kidney, a torn labrum, and calf issues that just wouldn't go away. He actually won Comeback Player of the Year in 2018 after missing a full season in 2017, throwing for nearly 4,600 yards and 39 touchdowns while looking like the best player on earth. Then, in a move that shocked the sports world, he walked away from football that August at only 29 years old. His body was simply broken, and a generational talent retired in his prime because the people in charge of protecting him never made it a priority. That failure wasn't on Luck's part, it was a total organizational collapse. Now we're seeing a similar story play out with Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. He went first overall in 2020 and suffered a torn ACL in his first year, but he came back in year 2 to throw for 34 touchdowns and lead the Bengals to a Super Bowl. Nobody saw that run coming, and it proved that his talent was a real deal. But the Bengals have developed a scary pattern of letting Joe take massive hits and then acting surprised when he gets hurt. That ACL tear in his rookie year happened because the line couldn't block, and even during the Super Bowl run, Joe was sacked 7 times in the biggest game of his life. He missed time in 2023 with the wrist injury, and then turf toe surgery cost him most of 2025 as well. Every time he returns to the field, people ask if he's injury prone, but you have to look at the sack numbers to tell the real story. He's led the league in sacks multiple times, which tells us that this isn't a QB who can't move. It's a quarterback playing behind a line that leaves him completely exposed. The Bengals have incredible weapons like Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, so the skill positions are clearly taken care of. What they haven't done is commit the resources to building the kind of elite offensive line that championship teams actually need. There's a massive gap between what Burrow has achieved and what he could have done if he wasn't running for his life on every single play. And that's not going to change anytime soon because the Bengals have retained their GM and coach for another season. Both Andrew and Joe prove the exact same point. Luck shows us what happens when a team never fixes the protection issues and a career gets cut short. Burrow shows us what happens when you build a flashy offense but leave the foundation weak, resulting in flashes of greatness that are constantly interrupted by trips to IR. Having 2 Comeback Player of the Year awards before turning 30 isn't a badge of honor, it's an indictment on the front office. These are special players, but the organization has ruined them. We've spent time breaking down coaching instability and the disaster of bad roster construction, but there's a third factor working against these young quarterbacks that's much harder to quantify. It's the sheer weight of the label they're forced to carry from day one. When you're the first overall pick, you aren't just asked to learn a playbook and lead a huddle. You're expected to carry the entire soul of a franchise on your back at 22 years old. The media slaps a generational tag on you, the margin for error completely vanishes, and every single stumble you make is magnified 10 times over by the national spotlight. Kyler Murray entered the league in 2019 fresh off a Heisman Trophy win at Oklahoma, bringing a rare blend of electric speed and legitimate arm talent to the desert. His career started exactly how you'd want, as he took home Offensive Rookie of the Year and earned 2 Pro Bowl nods within his first 3 seasons. By any objective metric, that's a massive success for a young starter. Yet the conversation around Murray never actually reflected those achievements. It always felt like the football world was just waiting for a reason to write him off, treating every slump like it was a permanent indictment of his talent. The reality is that the Arizona Cardinals organization never provided him with a stable foundation, as they cycled through coordinators and failed to build a roster that could sustain success over a full calendar year. Arizona would look like a powerhouse for 1 month, but then the infrastructure would shift or crumble, forcing Murray to essentially start from scratch. Look at the 2021 season for the perfect example of this trend, where the Cardinals started 7-0 and looked like the best team in football before losing 5 of their last 7 games. They limped into the playoffs as a 3 seed only to get embarrassed in the first round, but that wasn't a case of Murray suddenly losing his ability. It was a team that ran out of answers. The second defense is adjusted, mostly because the front office hadn't put together the depth necessary to help their QB make midseason corrections. Then the ACL tear happened in 2022, which cost him the majority of the following season and gave his critics even more ammunition. By the time he was back on the field, the "he's too small" narrative had been playing on a loop for 6 straight years without a break. Even when his numbers were solid, like his 3,700-yard campaign in 2021, the league's obsession with his 5'10" frame meant that the eye test was always going to be rigged against him. People weren't looking for proof that he could play, they were simply hovering, waiting for the next mistake so they could say they were right about his height and his attitude all along. Now, we were seeing the same exact script play out with Caleb Williams, who landed in Chicago in 2024 as the most hyped prospect the sport had seen in a decade. Before he even took a snap, analysts were comparing him to Patrick Mahomes and calling him a generational savior for a franchise that had been starving for a QB. Some media members even picked the Chicago Bears as their Super Bowl pick. When Matt Eberflus got fired mid-season and the Bears finished with a 5-12 record, the same media outlets that spent 2 years praising Caleb immediately started running segments asking if he was a bust. The problem with the generational label is that it provides zero protection when you're dropped into a toxic situation. It actually does the opposite by making the criticism much louder and more personal when the team around you fails to perform. If a normal rookie struggles, fans say that they need more time to develop. But if a generational prospect has a bad year, the narrative is that the scouts were wrong about everything. The standard we apply to these players is completely disconnected from the reality of the organization that are supposed to be protecting them. In both cases, when the win-loss column started looking ugly, the QB was the only one who had to stand at the podium and take the blame for everyone else's failures. The sad truth is that most QBs never get to show the world who they actually are because the situation they're in swallows them whole. Baker Mayfield is the most vivid example of a player who survived a dysfunctional start to save his career elsewhere. He arrived in Cleveland in 2018 and immediately broke the rookie touchdown record with 27 scores, proving right away that he belonged on an NFL field. By his 3rd year, he led the Browns to an 11-5 record and their first playoff victory in over a quarter century by taking down Pittsburgh in the wildcard round. That should have been the foundation for a decade of success, but instead it turned out to be the high watermark for his time in Cleveland. Baker became the 4th quarterback in history of the league to play for 4 different head coaches in his first 3 seasons, which is a level of instability that would break almost anyone. There is no continuity and no stable offensive identity, and the situation only got worse when the locker room split over the OBJ drama. Mayfield tried to gut it out through a torn labrum in his shoulder during the 2021 season, but his body couldn't give him what he needed, and his performance suffered for it. The end came when the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson, and in a move that perfectly sums up the organization, Baker found out he was being replaced on social media before a single person from the front office called him. His time in Cleveland didn't end with a professional conversation, it ended with a tweet he saw the exact same time the rest of the world did. After a rough 1-5 stint in Carolina and a quick emergency stop in Los Angeles, Tampa Bay offered him a 1-year prove-it deal in 2023 that most experts thought was a desperation move. But the Buccaneers gave him a legitimate offensive coordinator in Liam Cohen and a winning culture that had already been established during the Tom Brady era. In an environment where the coaches are actually committed to his strengths, Baker went 9-8, made the Pro Bowl, and led the team deep into the postseason. He followed that up with a 10-7 season and 41 touchdown passes. Now this past season was marred by injury, but he's still a really good QB. The same player Cleveland threw away is now one of the most reliable and productive quarterbacks in the entire NFC. Jared Goff's journey is perhaps even more dramatic because of how high his peaks were before the floor fell out from under him. His rookie year in 2016 was a total nightmare, which eventually got turned around when Sean McVay arrived and installed the modern system. But the relationship with McVay eventually fractured as the offense slowed, and the Rams eventually traded him to Detroit along with 2 first-round picks just to get his contract off the books. The message from LA was loud and clear. They didn't think he was a guy who could win them a ring. At the time of the trade, Detroit was considered one of the most hopeless franchises in professional sports. But the arrival of Dan Campbell and offensive coordinator Ben Johnson changed everything. Johnson did something that very few coaches at this level bother to do, which was simply ask Goff what plays made him feel the most comfortable. Instead of forcing the QB to fit into a rigid system designed for someone else, they built the entire offense around what Goff did best. The results have been staggering, as the Lions reached the NFC Championship game while Jared put up elite numbers, including 4,629 yards and 37 TDs in 2024, and he's been a top QB ever since. Sometimes you need a change of scenery before people are willing to see what was there all along. Think about what we've covered here. Trevor Lawrence wasn't actually as bad as he looked as a rookie, but he was playing for a head coach who was publicly embarrassing the franchise every other week. Bryce Young wasn't a bust either, yet he was throwing to receivers who couldn't get open on third down while playing behind the line that gave him no time for a coach who got fired before the year was over. Caleb Williams didn't prove anything in year 1, but he proved everything in year 2 once the building around him finally made sense. Cam Ward is 3-14 as a rookie, and people are already writing career obituaries, even though his head coach got fired 6 games in. Check back in 3 years before deciding anything. Now, none of this means that these players are completely off the hook. Goff's early decision making was genuinely shaky, and the numbers he put up in 2016 were not just about the situation he was in. Baker Mayfield had real moments where his personality made already difficult situations harder to manage. Kyler Murray's contract standoff in Arizona created genuine friction inside the building at a time when the team needed everyone pulling in the same direction. Bryce Young did look bad, and it was a correct decision to be benched. And Trevor Lawrence's inconsistencies along with his sometimes aloof personality made it tougher on the Jags for sure. These are real things that happen and they matter, but they also happen inside environments that were already combustible. It's a lot easier for personality conflicts to explode when the roster's thin, the coaching is inconsistent, and the front office doesn't have a clear plan. These are 22 or 23-year-olds. Most of them have never had a real job, and they have been the best player on every team they've ever played on since they were kids. They walk into the NFL as supposed saviors of franchises that have been losing for years, and the gap between what they actually are being asked to do and what a 22-year-old is realistically capable of doing is enormous. The organizations that actually get it right are not the ones who draft the QB and then sit back and wait for him to fix everything. They're the ones who build around him. Look at McVay's building around Goff's strengths in 2017, or Campbell and Johnson asking Jared what he was comfortable with running and building the offense from that conversation in 2024. Liam Cohen figured out Baker's game in Tampa and sped up his release, and then he did the same thing with Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville by telling him to stop playing scared and just let it rip. Ben Johnson arrived in Chicago and immediately unlocked Williams in a way that the previous staff never came close to doing. Even Patrick Mahomes needed Andy Reid. He needed a real offensive line, a real scheme, and years of stability before he became the Patrick Mahomes we all know today. Having Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce definitely helped as well. Nobody handed him a 2-14 team and called it a day. The best QB development situations in modern NFL history have all had one thing in common, which is the organization was patient and it built around the player instead of expecting the player to carry the building alone. So there you have it. Thanks for watching and subscribe if you're new.